Regina K. Walters, Robert Ben Rhodes. On April 1, 1990, in the small hours of the morning, an Arizona state trooper pulled onto the shoulder of Interstate 10 to check on a truck, parked with its hazard lights blinking in the dark, the most routine stop in a patrol officer's routine night. The driver, a heavy-set long hauler named Robert Ben Rhodes, seemed calm, almost annoyed at the interruption, a working man being delayed. Then the trooper looked into the cab and found a woman inside, restrained, terrified, and alive. The sleeper berth of Rhodes's truck had been converted into something investigators would describe in court as a rolling torture chamber, and the traffic stop that night, pure routine, pure luck, was the only reason anyone ever saw inside it. What detectives unraveled afterward reached back across years of open road. Rhodes had been hunting along the interstates, using his truck the way other predators used a house, a place under his total control that happened to move at 60 miles an hour, crossing jurisdiction after jurisdiction so that no two detectives ever compared notes. Rhodes documented what he did, keeping photographs and records with the diligence of a man who believed no one would ever open the drawer. Among his victims was 14-year-old Regina K. Walters, a runaway he held captive for weeks, and the photographs he took of her, recovered later, became some of the most haunting evidence in American criminal history, studied since as proof of how completely an interstate cab could hide a crime in plain sight at every way station and fuel stop in the country. Rhodes was convicted of Regina's murder and given life, and more than 20 years later, prosecutors in Texas brought him back to court for a couple murdered along Interstate 10 in 1990, adding further sentences as old cases finally caught up to the man whose crime scenes had been scattered across a continent. The trucker had understood something about America before the FBI did. On the highway, every victim is from somewhere else. Every crime scene is a county no one revisits, and the man who never stops moving never gives a pattern a place to form. Tanja Bennett, Keith Jesperson. In January 1990, a young woman named Tanja Bennett was murdered near Portland, Oregon, and the case went spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. A troubled woman named Laverne Pavlinak confessed, implicating her own boyfriend, apparently to escape the relationship, and although she recanted, both were convicted, and both went to prison for a murder neither committed. The real killer was a 6'6" long-haul trucker named Keith Jesperson, and the injustice gnawed at him in a way remorse never had, because someone else was getting credit for his work. So he started writing. On the wall of a truck stop restroom, he scrawled a confession with details only the killer could know, and signed it with a smiley face. Letters followed, to newspapers, to prosecutors, each signed the same way, and the press named the unknown author the Happy Face Killer. For 5 years, Jesperson rolled across the continent, hauling freight on legitimate schedules and killing at least 8 women along his routes, most of them women whose deaths were investigated separately, if at all, by departments in different states that had never heard of each other, exactly the fragmentation his profession was built on. In 1995, he murdered his girlfriend, Julie Winningham, in Washington state, the one victim on Earth whose life visibly intersected with his, and the road finally ran out within days. In custody, he confessed at length. Pavlinak and her boyfriend were released after more than 4 years, an innocent couple imprisoned by a false confession, while the real killer mailed smiley faces to the newspapers, furious at being ignored. Jesperson remains in prison in Oregon, and his case has had a strange second life, because his daughter, who was a teenager when he was arrested, eventually went public with what it is to be a killer's child, and her account has reached millions. One more circle of people a single murderer damages, in this case his own. Sarah Hulbert, Bruce Mendenhall. On the night of June 26, 2007, a woman named Sarah Hulbert was found murdered at a truck stop in Nashville, Tennessee. The case landed with Sergeant Pat Postiglione, a Nashville homicide detective with a long memory and a career full of closed files, and something about the scene bothered him beyond the crime itself. It looked practiced, unhurried, like the work of someone who had done this before and expected to do it again. 2 weeks later, reviewing the truck stop's security footage, he watched a yellow Peterbilt roll through the lot at the right hour, and when the same yellow truck pulled into the same truck stop while he happened to be there, Postiglione did something most detectives never get the chance to do. He climbed up to the cab, knocked on the door, and interviewed the driver on the spot. The driver was Bruce Mendenhall, a 56-year-old long hauler from Illinois, polite, unremarkable, a former small-town alderman who had run for mayor back home, and who answered the detective's questions with the mild patience of a man being delayed on a schedule. Inside his cab, investigators found the blood of multiple women murdered at truck stops in different states, cases that had never been connected because they belonged to different agencies, different task forces, different filing cabinets. Mendenhall was convicted of Sarah Hulbert's murder, then convicted again as other states brought their cases, and he is linked by evidence to a string of truck stop killings along the interstates of Tennessee, Alabama, Indiana, and beyond. Even the cell could not hold the danger in him. From jail, he tried to arrange the killings of the witnesses against him and earned an additional conviction for solicitation of murder before the first trial had even finished. The break in the case was not a database or a profile. It was one detective who trusted his own unease, walked across a parking lot, and knocked. The man who walked in, Wayne Adam Ford. On November 3, 1998, a bearded long-haul trucker walked into the sheriff's office in Eureka, California, with his brother at his side, and told the deputies he needed to confess. His name was Wayne Adam Ford, and what he had brought with him, and what he began describing, left no room for doubt or delay. Over the previous year, along the highways of California, he had murdered 4 women he had picked up at truck stops and roadsides, and he was surrendering, he said, because he could not make himself stop and did not want there to be a 5th. It remains one of the only cases of its kind in the entire literature of these crimes. A serial killer ending his own series by walking through the front door of a police station and asking to be stopped. The confession did not soften what the investigation found, and a jury convicted him on 4 counts of murder and sent him to death row, where he remains. His victims, some of whom took years to identify, were women living at the margins of the road itself, hitchhikers and truck stop workers. The same population every killer in this video chose, for the same reason. Out there, between the exits, is a floating nation of people no county claims, and the men who prey on them know exactly how long it takes anyone to notice. Here is the number that turns these 4 cases into one story. The FBI maintains a program called the Highway Serial Killings Initiative, created when analysts noticed bodies accumulating along interstate corridors, and its database has grown to hundreds upon hundreds of victims found along American highways, with hundreds of suspects, a striking share of them long-haul truckers. The job is not the crime, and the overwhelming majority of drivers are exactly what they seem, working people carrying the country on their backs. And more than a few of the tips that closed these cases came from truckers themselves, who know better than anyone what the road can hide. But the road offers a predator everything a hunting ground can offer: movement, anonymity, victims far from home, and 1,000 jurisdictions that still do not always talk to each other. The interstate is the largest crime scene in America. It is just never all in one place at one time.